Overbetting the river has become a popular move on the high-stakes poker tournament scene. Making a bet of larger than the pot size can put your opponent in a tough spot. In this edition of Poker Strategy, we spoke to card player columnist, chip leader coaching instructor, and World Series of Poker bracelet winner Ryan Laplante about when you look to use the river overbet.
So when I'm looking to overbet someone, I'm not necessarily looking for a specific board or a specific hand to do it with. I mean, obviously, combo-wise, I want to be pretty careful with what I'm doing it with, and that will reflect based on the board, but I'm more focused on what their range looks like. So what I'm trying to look for is when they have a fairly weak and capped range, that's when I'm really going to want to hammer those overbets. But you do have to be a little bit careful, because when your opponent will know what their range looks like, and that's when they're also going to be looking to try to catch those overbets. That's why what hand you choose in it will be really important, because you don't want to block the stuff that you can get fold. You want to try to block the strongest stuff that they're going to have in that range. So it's more, anytime you're looking to overbet, or honestly any situation in poker, really just comes down to what does their range look like. And I try to simplify things as much as possible when I'm doing coaching, which I try to think of their range as just a straight line, where this is like the nuts, this is like weak value, this is like, very weak value with some showdown, and weak bluffs and stuff, and this is air. And generally when their range doesn't have any of the top stuff in it, that's when I really want to try to hammer my bluffs, and when I want to choose really large sizings. The other times that you want to choose more larger sizings, but in these situations, what combo you choose and what the board looks like is exceptionally important, is when they can have a fairly uncapped range, maybe something that could include the nuts, but you block it. Those situations you can also overbet pot. So it's both of these types of situations. The ones in which they're weak and capped, there you can kind of go after a little bit harder than the situations in which they're uncapped. Because anytime they're fairly uncapped, you need to be very, very careful with how you're targeting them and trying to figure out what they can actually fold. So there, choosing the combo matters a lot, and it requires a lot of finesse in these spots.
Laplante mentioned a lot of factors to consider before making an overbet as a bluff on the river. We asked him for his advice on what type of hands should be considered candidates for a river overbet for value.
So just anything that's near the top of your range. It doesn't really matter. What more matters is when you get to that situation and you're thinking about, how you're building that range, you need to make sure that's pretty well balanced against your bluffs. And the way that you balance it is, let's say I want to 1.5x pot, then when my opponent calls, they're getting 2.5 to 1, 1.5 to 2.5, they're getting like 1.75 to 1. So I need to make sure that I'm value weighted to about 60-ish% value. So then when I'm thinking about that, then I'm trying to figure out, do I have enough bluffs in this spot weighted out against my value hands? So when I'm choosing that sizing, it's far more important to make sure that I'm using enough of my value range so it protects my few bluffs. So there are, that's like the more, complex part of the issue is how far down you go. Well, that's going to be villain specific, it's going to be situation specific, and it's going to be like, how wide of a value range do I actually get to the river in this spot? Sometimes you get to the river and you only have like 30 value combos or 20 value combos that can do that. Sometimes you get to the river with like 80 value combos, and we can have like that many super strong value combos compared to your opponent's weaker capped range. That's when you can really go for it. So essentially you're looking for a good way to think about it is think about the strongest few hands that they can have, and then those are going to be the near bottom of what you want to do it with. And then everything stronger than that you can overpot, and then your bluffs, you just want to block them from having some of the strongest stuff.
Looking to put the pressure on your opponent with a river overbet is one thing. It can be a little less fun to try to figure out what to do when your opponent overbets into you.
When I'm facing them, that's where my hand combos matter significantly so. When I get to the river and I've got a fairly weak capped range, I'm focusing on what combos do I have that are best to call with based off of whether or not I block reasonable bluff combos. So I don't want to have like a bricked draw card in my hand. I want to make sure that I block some of the strongest stuff they can have. So maybe, a bottom two pair type thing that can block sets and stronger two pairs, a top pair that unblocks any of their brick draws. I'm focusing on being kind of high up in my range that also doesn't block their draws. So for instance, I could get to the river, let's say it's queen 10 4 deuce, and I have a hand like king queen, and the river is like a 7, and all the draws bricked. I don't really want to call with king queen with the, with the king that blocks, the flush draws and stuff. I want to unblock. So king queen there that blocks the draws is a pretty bad call. I'd much rather have a hand like, queen 8 that doesn't block, or queen 9 that doesn't block, or if I am going to call king queen, I want to make sure that it doesn't block the flush draws. I want it to unblock stuff. So anytime you're getting put into these types of situations, thinking about what bluffs you block or what value hands you block, that's what matters the most. It's not necessarily, the board texture obviously does matter, but you're also just thinking about where you're at in your own range and the types of hands that they're going to do it with, and then whether or not you block or unblock. This is where like the higher level poker comes down to, is understanding ranges, how they come together, and figuring out how to best maneuver based off this information, and then taking into factor stack depth and ICM and everything else that matters in general tournament play.
Thanks to Ryan Laplante for his insight into river overbets, and thank you for checking out this video right here on Card Player TV.